Faithfully loving your wrong. Here in our weakness you find us, falling before your throne. Oh, we're falling before your throne. You are the one that we praise. You are the one we adore. You give the healing and grace. Our hearts always hunger for. Oh, our hearts always. You are the one we adore. You give the healing and grace. Our hearts always hunger for. Oh, our hearts always hunger for.
I thought I was about to get to preach to some music. That would have been nice. So one of the things that I didn't say that I intended to earlier was that Tony, our trumpet player, lost his father earlier this week, and he wanted to make sure that I let y'all know how thankful he was with outpouring of prayers and reaching out to him, and even folks going to the funeral on Friday. And he said he especially wanted to thank two people because he knew that Donnie Hines and Skip Hobson had warrants out in Tennessee, and for them to cross state lines was very special to him. So he wanted to be sure that they knew that. Today we are talking about a subject that maybe is not addressed as often as it should be, and there's a number of reasons for that. But it's kind of a big deal in the Bible. It shows up constantly, and it shows up in the Bible way more often than it shows up in the Christian life, the modern Christian life in America. At least I know that's the case for me. And the subject we're going to talk about today is, and that's interesting too. He doesn't say if you fast, does he? He says when you fast. It's as if he's expecting that would be something that we would take on as Christians. He says, and when you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces, that their fasting may be seen by others. Truly, I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, that your fasting may not be seen by others, but by your Father who is in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. And even though it says when you fast, in this passage, even though we see multiple people in the Bible fasting, it seems like every name that you come across, every big name in the Bible has fasted at some point. Well, isn't that going to slow your metabolism down? Isn't that going to cause you to go into, have you heard starvation mode, where your body starts to eat muscle instead of fat? We feel as if when we do this, it's going to be detrimental to our health, we're going to be miserable, and it's going to affect us negatively. And, you know, if we're honest with ourselves, some of us might even think if we participated in this, we could end up in the hospital. It's something that just must be terrible for us because we feel bad when we do it. So that must be the case. So that is one of the things that holds us back. Another thing is our culture. Now, our culture is one that is very much against fasting. One of the most popular ad campaigns I've seen, and I actually enjoy their commercials. They're pretty funny sometimes, but Snickers bar says, "Hungry, why wait?" Have you seen those commercials where they have someone who is acting a little bit crazy? When they give them a Snickers bar, all of a sudden they turn back into themselves, and then they're able to go about their business. Well, we've been convinced that if we don't eat, we're going to be a bad person. We're convinced that this is something that is unhealthy for us. We are convinced that this is something we should not be doing. And I want to say to you that there are some people who benefit from us not fasting. Recently, you've probably noticed different restaurants have been trying to grow their companies, and there are very few places left to grow. And so one of the things you'll see is restaurants that are not traditionally known for selling breakfast are starting to sell breakfast because they're just trying to figure out ways to sell more food. We're trying to sell food that doesn't have as many calories so we can just keep on eating and buying more. Fasting does not go along with that. People lose money when we fast. Also, another aspect of this is when there are companies out there who make lots and lots of money off dieting programs, off giving you the right things to eat, the right things to drink to help you lose weight, the right medicines to help you lose weight, all these different things. Who gets money when you're fat? You do. Nobody gets money except you by the things you save on spending your money on. So there is not any incentive in our popular culture, the people who are trying to influence us in terms of buying things, there's no incentive at all for them to encourage us to fast. They lose money when we do this. So we have our health as a concern. We have our culture telling us not to do it. And, another one is that it's tough to fast, especially in the beginning. If you've tried to fast, you remember the headaches, you remember the hunger pains, you remember how much you want to eat, that it is incredibly difficult physically to stop eating food. If we're talking about fasts that are just involving food, it's tough to do that. It is hard to go through a whole day and not eat anything. Your friends around you are eating, your family's eating, the food smells good. My wife can cook, so I'm smelling these things. I have to help the kids eat, so I'm looking at the things that they eat if I'm trying to fast. It is tough to fast, and that's often the reason that we don't. But for me, personally, the reason I think that I have not fasted maybe as much as I should have is exactly within this passage that we just read, that talks about not appearing prideful, not appearing before people, don't let other folks know that you're fasting. And so I have been reluctant to fast because I'm trying to find that time period where nobody is going to know about it, right? You want to find that time period where nobody knows that you're fasting, because if they know you're fasting, well, will that be my reward? Will God not reward me? Will there be no positive effects that come from this? And so for a long time, I avoided fasting because I thought, when could I possibly go a whole day, much less, I read about people fasting a whole week. I've read about people fasting 40 days, much less being able to go that long without someone knowing that I'm fasting and being filled with a sense of pride about that. How could I get that done? But there's all those different negatives, all those different drawbacks, all those reasons to not fast. But it's hard to not engage in it to some degree, to try to wonder if that's not something for me when we look at just some of the people in the Bible and in our history who have fasted. It's like an all-star list from the Bible of folks that have fasted. We have Jesus who fasted. He fasted for 40 days. He goes into the desert and he's confronted by Satan and gets to see all the temptations he's going to face in his ministry, and he gets to conquer those before he goes out into his ministry. We see Moses, who receives the 10 Commandments as he's fasting. We see David, who is asking for forgiveness from God, trying to save his baby's life. We see David doing everything he can to get closer to God, and not eating is a part of that. We see Elijah fast. We see Esther guide her whole nation as they're in exile to fast. We see Daniel fast. We see Paul fast. So we see all of these different people who are fasting. There must be something to it, right? That if they who are so holy, so spiritual, so close to God, so good, feel that it is necessary for them to fast, then who am I to think that I don't need it as well? And the truth is, as with many of these different things, many of these different objections that we raise, they don't hold a lot of weight when you really pay attention to them. And I think that's one of the best parts, or the worst parts about Satan, about lies, about things that we hear, is that there's a tiny grain of truth to it that causes us to look away and not investigate, and then we don't realize that it's a lie because we see that tiny grain of truth and don't investigate any further. And first, I just want to address the culture, and I think I already have to some degree, that our culture is against fasting, but whoever said that following culture was the right thing to do? If you follow culture, you're going to end up like everybody else, and that is not necessarily the place that we want to be. We end up making other people rich, making other people achieve their goals, and we often miss out on our own. Now, this may be obvious when it's spelled out for you, but maybe it's not so obvious as we think about it. But there is nothing in the world that does this, but it is the only thing that you can do that can turn your fat into money. There's nothing else that does that. By not eating, you don't have to spend money on food, and by not spending money on food, you're able to save that. And that's part of what we're talking about with sacrificial giving. Even if it's just eating, not eating out, but eating the lunch that you brought for yourself, you're able to save money in that way. And if you don't eat any at all, you save even more money. And it's a way of saying to the culture, I'm not going to participate in this. I don't have to eat every couple hours to be happy. I don't have to eat every 3 minutes to be happy. I don't have to eat all the time just to feel good. I can do without. Because as Jesus says when he's in the desert, we don't live by food alone, but we live by other things. We live by the Word of God. We live by relationship with God. We live by the motivation to do the right things. All of these things are things we're called to live by, and not just the food we eat. Now, I do recognize that fasting is hard. I know that. We started in our prayer group. We meet on Tuesday mornings at 8. And it's open. If you want to come join that, we meet over in the prayer room, and we've actually been, Jeannie, we've been using your room some too, so hope you don't mind that. We've been breaking into your room and using it. But we started reading a book by a guy named Jettison Franklin, and it's a book called Fasting. And we decided, all right, we've read about it enough. We're going to go ahead and take the plunge. We're going to try to fast. And so we decided we're going to fast on this Monday, and we're going to come back and talk about it, talk about the experiences we've had. And for me, it had been about 5 years since I'd fasted. It's one of those things that's easy to get out of the habit of because it's got so many different things that are going against it. We've mentioned them. Well, does it hurt my health? Is it really something that I ought to be doing? Is it going to hurt me? I mean, all these things run through your head. How am I going to find time to do it when people aren't looking at me? And so we finally did this. And I got to tell you, the first day that I did it was miserable. And I think it's important not to gloss that over, that fasting in the beginning is miserable. It is not something that feels good at all. And part of the reason for that is our bodies are adapted to getting food all the time, and our body begins to go under certain processes when we fast. Have you ever heard that when you begin to fast, your body begins to detox, that it begins to get rid of the toxins that are in it? That's part of the reason that we feel so bad. Another part is we're just so used to eating on a regular basis, we begin to feel hunger pains that aren't necessarily us being hungry as much as our body saying it's time to eat. One of the things that's interesting to note out is that a person who is fasting for 20 days feels the exact same hunger pains that I feel in the evening after I haven't eaten for a whole day. It's not really any more intense. It's not really any more different. It's about the same. And so what that tells us is that these hunger pains are misleading. It's not so much about us starving, about diets and ketosis and those sorts of things. This is the reason that if somebody is participating in those, it's a lot easier for them to just start a fast because their body's more used to burning fats already and they can hop into it a little easier. And so what this tells us with fast is that you pay the highest price in the beginning. And many of us, when we try to fast, we have such an extended amount of time between the times that we fast that we are doing the hardest part over and over and over again. The part that's going to make us feel the sickest, the part that makes us feel the hungriest. We participate in that over and over and over again, when if we would just push through, do it a little bit longer, or do it a little bit more often, we wouldn't experience near the same amount of pain that we do. It becomes a matter of frequency that gives this a certain amount of power. Now, another aspect that I want to bring up is that we think that it affects us in a negative way in terms of our health. But this is stuff that I want to bring up as much just to show that's not an issue, more so than trying to tell you this is the reason you should fast. The reason I'm telling you should fast is because of the spiritual benefits. But there are physical benefits as well that are a little bit counterintuitive. So a couple of things that happen during fasting that you might not expect is actually you retain muscle. We think that it immediately moves us into starvation mode and we begin to lose muscle, and that's just not the case. Your body doesn't begin to go in starvation mode until you're at 4% body fat. And just as a frame of reference, you know, the elite marathoners that you see on TV in the Boston Marathon and elsewhere, those guys are operating at about 8%. So they're still 4% away from actual starvation when we're worried that we're going to actually lose our muscle. Actually, if you fast just a little bit longer, it actually stimulates human growth hormone. There are things that begin to go on in your body, and new cells are beginning to be formed in the brain. The reason that they see that fasting actually helps with cancer. It can help cancer patients because it begins to repair these cells and eat those cells that are the most damaged. And I'm not saying it's a cure-all and that it cures cancer, but there are definitely studies that suggest that it makes a difference. We know it makes a difference in epilepsy. We know it makes a difference in a number of different health issues that people have. It makes us better off. It helps us. It doesn't hurt us. The problem is it's painful. Culture tells us we ought not to do it. And we are afraid that we're going to mess up our relationship with God. Now, I want to tell you that, and what I mean by that is that we'll do it in front of people and we'll be found to be prideful. And I don't believe that's the case at all. I believe that as long as we go into a fast and we are just honest with people, we don't try to look haggard, we don't try to show that we're paying a huge price for fasting, as long as we're just honest about what's going on, I believe God will reward that because He knows what we're living in now. It would be just about impossible to fast without letting someone know that it's going on. How many times do you get invited to eat once a week? How many times are people asking you to sit down at the table with them? How many times are you sitting down with your family? So it's impossible to fast and not let some people know. But we can do it in a way that's not prideful, that isn't going to try to make us look better, because that's not what this is about. Really, fasting is an admission that we need God. Fasting is an admission that what we've been doing has not been quite good enough, that we'd like more of God, and that we believe, based on the Bible and experience, that fasting can supercharge our devotional life, our prayer life, our ability to hear from God. I know for me that it has made a huge difference in my life at certain times where I feel as if I am able to hear more from God. So the spiritual benefits, number one, you feel closer to God. You feel as if you can hear from God more. You feel as if you know more of what His will is for you, and you find success in prayer. Jettison Franklin, the author of the book that we are reading in this study on Tuesday mornings, was telling about a capital campaign that they had. And each year, he leads the church in a 21-day fast. And now, not everyone is doing without anything but water. He does, but there are some people who say, well, I'm going to fast for 1 day, I'm going to fast for 2 days, or I'm going to fast from coffee for 21 days, or I'm going to fast for different things. There are a lot of different ways to fast. But later on in the year, and he attributes this to the fast, and you can take it for what it's worth, but he had one person donate $1 million, and through the rest of the church, there were several more $1 million given. Another person gave $150,000, and he attributes that to the fast that they went through. Now, I don't know if that was a supernatural movement as much as it was these folks are fasting, and so they're closer to God and more likely to give. I don't know exactly what happened, but the results were that their needs were taken care of. There's guidance, there's spiritual insights. And maybe the most important part in my mind is we begin to understand that we may not have been as close to God as we thought we were. And what I mean by that is that certain things within our lives are revealed. We understand what either is controlling us or what has the potential to control us. If you go back and read about Jesus going into the desert and being tempted by Satan, these are temptations that he faces all through his ministry, and they needed to get out of him and be sure to get out of him before he got in a position where Satan might convince him that they were the right thing to do. And I know we only think of Jesus as God, but we also know that he's 100% man as well. He dealt with temptations the same way that we have dealt with temptations, even though he was perfect. And so just to give you a little explanation or a little example of what I've been through recently, just beginning to dip my toes into fasting. And like I said before, it's been 5 years since I've done this, and this is in no way to lift myself up. It's intended to show how much I need it and how short I've fallen in some ways. But I told you the first day that we fasted, it was miserable. It was on a Monday. I didn't get my Sunday afternoon nap, so I was tired, and I don't know about them. So maybe that's another sermon, naps. But I hadn't gotten that. I was doing without food, and we had decided that the time that you would eat, you go and you spend that time alone with God. And I'll tell you what happened. I spent that time alone with God. I sat down and I prayed, and I woke up with my neck hurting because it was doing this. The time didn't feel that great. I felt miserable, and nothing really seemed to happen. Now, that next day was a Tuesday, and I ate, and I don't know how many calories I consumed, but I felt like I made up for lost time a little bit. And then on Wednesday,